Fujairah and as an emerging global energy hub, and how it is performing with all of the opportunities and challenges in the global marketplace. And that's what we'll be doing here today. Over three half-hour sessions, we will be looking at the outlook for Fujairah in the post-pandemic cycle. We'll use that word liberally, post-pandemic. That is a debate, of course, for many places still caught in the pandemic, but many places also emerging from it. And the differentiator seems to be, to a great extent, levels of vaccination. We will be looking across three subjects: trading, storage, and shipping. And we will start this morning with the trading session, and I'm going to invite each of those speakers to come onto the virtual stage. Start with Chris Bake, member of the Executive Committee of Vitol, Adi Imsirovic, a Senior Research Fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, and of course our host, Martin Hageboer, the Business Development Manager for the Port of Fujairah. We welcome you all to the virtual stage and ask you to turn on your cameras and your sound from your respective places. Perhaps we will start on this occasion by giving the floor to Martin as the host and partner of the Port of Fujairah to sort of set the scene a little bit for Fujairah. Martin.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sean. Thanks for organizing the workshop. Pleasure to speak today. If we maybe look back at the first three quarters of this year, a review on that, I think it's been a good year for the port. If you look at the two main segments for us, of course, it's the liquid bulk and the dry bulk. On the dry bulk, we started a little bit slower than expected, but we see picking up in the last 2 months and going to Q4 at levels that we were expecting for this year. So that has been a good recovery also from last year, which was a challenging segment to be in. Liquid bulk is outperforming our expectations. We do quite a bit more than anticipated, so that's very good news, I think, for us, for the market. The recovery came already more or less in Q3, Q4 last year, and we continued that. And depending a bit on how Q4 is gonna be, it's gonna be another record year in terms of throughput handled for the port, but also for Fujairah overall. So we see continuously growth, although modest. It is an upward trend in also still in refined products. In terms of projects, of course, we have seen the inauguration of Bruges Phase 2 and the connection consequently to the port. We had the APPEC facility. We have the ADNOC project, of course, is ongoing. This is to be completed very soon when they connect their current MOT terminal to us. This is in the final stage to happening and to test the system. So that's, of course, very exciting. And of course, we're going to see more of that probably next year. In terms of services, we improved. We look very much to be more efficient around our infrastructure, how we use it. We're getting to a point now, as I said, the volumes are growing, to see if we potentially have to add more infrastructure and when it's going to be at that point. So we will soon conduct another review on that, run a few scenarios to see what we should do to capture the growth, especially around the crude, but also to keep our high standard service levels to the terminals. So it's going well, Sean.
And Martin, just to follow up, there's a lot of expectation that ADNOC will connect to the manifold in the coming quarter. Is that on target? Do you expect that to happen?
Yeah, that's on target. That will happen. Obviously, the utilization of that, I think it's very important to state that it is mainly a contingency connection. So that is by foremost the reason why ADNOC connected to the port, giving them, of course, options to use the VLCC jetty or other berths besides their own SPMs. If they're going to use more of it, that's completely up to APPEC. But yes, Sean, it's going to happen as well.
Okay. Before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to make the note, as somebody's whispering in my ear, that normally this would be an off-the-record round table in a nice closed room in London or in Singapore. On this occasion, there's technically not the ability to sort of shut that down in the virtual sense. So everybody should be alert to the fact that what they say will be on the record. Chris Bake, lovely to have you back at the table. Great to see you after the summer. And perhaps, Chris, it's sitting at the end of September, $80 oil just printed in the last hours. Maybe you could give us your sense of where the global oil markets are at. Are we indeed facing a shortage despite the fact that we all thought OPEC had lots of oil in the box?
I think, number one, great to be back. Thank you very much, Sean, for hosting the session again. Good to see some very familiar faces. Hopefully we can see you again in 3D rather than 2D at some point in the near future.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, just thinking back as I walked in this morning, yeah, $80 was broken overnight as Eastern Trade, as you rightly mentioned, Sean. I think as recently as a few weeks ago, the oil pundits were saying, well, still got COVID overhang, still got the potential for, I'm not sure if we're on third wave or fourth wave or fifth wave at this point, but further curtailment of demand going into the winter. But looking at some of the data from the peaks of oil storage at probably April, May of last year till today, an impressive 500 plus million barrels draw in inventory. We're well below the 5-year averages now. We're approaching 15-year lows over the last 15 years of data. If you look at the total amount of petroleum storage, that has obviously also grown over time as demand has increased. Demand has been good, and obviously oil substitution, which we muted probably 4 weeks ago, is happening a lot. Liquid oil substitution is happening a lot as natural gas just runs and spirals pricing wise exponentially. So a very, very different picture from probably one that was there even a month, 6 weeks ago. JCPOA discussions with Iran have stalled despite efforts around the UN last week in New York. It seems like both sides are fairly entrenched and quite difficult to break the deadlock. So there probably won't be Iranian oil. So the big question this week is, will OPEC react in a way more aggressive than the programmed release that they've telegraphed very methodically monthly since April. So I think it's, as always, very, very dynamic times in the energy business.
Just picking up, Chris, on what Martin noted in his sort of last comment there about the fact that ADNOC's connectivity to the onshore or to the manifold system in Fujairah, of course, up till now, ADNOC exports from its own bespoke export terminal line. With this connectivity to the manifold in Fujairah, Chris, your thoughts on is it at a game changer? Is it possibly a game changer? How do you see it evolving the Fujairah ecosystem and the opportunities?
I mean, obviously, if the oil is allowed to be taken through the manifold and stored in Fujairah as tertiary storage or secondary storage rather than primary storage from the producer, I think it does change the equation because it allows incremental supply-demand balancing around the Fujairah infrastructure, which exists. As we know, there are crude tanks in Fujairah that could handle the crude. So yeah, it's another dimension to consider. It's not going to be massive because the amount of available crude storage is not massive. It's there. Several terminals have it, but obviously it does change. It just change the flow a little bit if that were to happen. I
Let's
think,
bring
I think the caveat, that Martin put on it is important, right? It's, for now, it's a contingency. It's not, I don't think, ADNOC, to my knowledge, hasn't said, yeah, we're keen to go and sell FOB and leave the oil in Fujairah for the time being.
Adi, welcome to the workshop. Another big development this year, of course, has been, in terms of relevance to Fujairah, but relevance to the points that Chris and Martin just referenced, has been the establishment of the IFAD, the ICE exchange in Abu Dhabi, and the launch of the Murban contract. We're now 6 months or so into that. I'd welcome your review on how it's performed, how it's contributed, where is it going, and the relevance that may have for Fujairah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean. Pleasure, and hello, everyone. I can probably try and link on to what Chris and Martin were saying regarding the manifold. Actually, for any good contract, you do need the infrastructure. Infrastructure is the key, as anyone who has traded WTI in April last year will tell you. Infrastructure is also very, very important. But you know, as we saw with I&E contract in May and June last year as well, when they're running out of storage, and they quickly actually managed to get additional storage. So I think that will be a really great, very important contribution, and further development of storage in Fujairah as well would be very, very important. The IFAD contract has been welcomed by the market. I think it hit the ground running reasonably well. As you know, my views, I think, was slightly different. I think it certainly met my expectations in terms of what was going to happen. I think there were a little bit, there's slightly exaggerated views that it would overnight take over Brent and WTI, and I think those views are very unrealistic. But I think it's done very well. I think the volumes, from what I've seen, I'm not trading it, but from what I've seen, have been growing. September delivery was a record, I think 11.5 million, which is quite good. and the contract's been ticking along quite nicely. The volumes have overtaken DME contract, which is significant. And a number of players involved has been growing, including the clearing members. I think Morgan Stanley also joined, I think, at some stage in May or June. So I think the contracts met my expectations. Of course, contracts you can't judge them by 6 months. You know, it's very hard to say what's going to happen in near future. I think it certainly could improve. And I think I was chatting with you about that a couple of months ago. There are some maybe issues regarding the costs. The costs could probably come down because at the moment, the ICE clearing is not accepting the LCs. So the costs are a little bit higher than other exchanges in terms of physical delivery. But, you know, I think the contract is functioning very well, and it certainly met my expectations. And for the region, it's certainly going to be very significant because it's providing a price discovery for one of the most important benchmarks in the Middle East. And I think in that respect, it's been welcomed by the other two major PRAs who also published the numbers. Also, one last thing, it's also provided the market for the first time in the region with the official selling prices, which are actually determined by the market rather than the producer, which I think is a very, very important development.
Just on that final point, Adi, is there anything that I mean, the narrative that's bubbling behind this, and it has for the last number of months, that challenges the UAE's continued membership of OPEC, given this dynamic? Can these two things coexist?
It is hard to tell. I think short term they certainly could. Long term, I think it's going to be a problem because we all know the UAE's plans to increase production significantly. Murban alone, I think ADNOC announced recently that in September 22, they're expecting almost 1.5 million barrels of exports. And so it certainly, the volumes are such that it would, at some stage in sort of medium future, it could be clashing with sort of OPEC ideas. But On the last point, as you said, yes, I think it's very important that ADNOC and sort of Abu Dhabi have decided to leave the OSPs to the market, which certainly puts them in a very strong competitive position versus other players in the region.
Let's go to the first survey question, because I'm interested to sort of set up the next sort of point to discuss, and that is the coming out of the COVID pandemic. While it clearly has been a turbulent period, the statement it has not fundamentally altered the course of established trends in the physical oil markets east of Suez. Agree with that statement or disagree that while turbulent, it hasn't fundamentally changed the trends that were already established and on their way? Martin, what does Fujairah, I mean, your thoughts on that statement, but ultimately, how does Fujairah, the port of Fujairah, see this moment of time coming out of it? Has it changed anything? Is it an opportunity? Is it not? What's the view of the port?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and you, I answered agree on it from the port perspective. If we look back at 2019, where we start to really increase as well the volumes, in 2020 with the disruptions, and now we're back in 2021. It's almost the same, right? We still serve the same markets, the same let's say fuel portfolio is there, right? We still do majority fuel oil. We serve our markets in East Africa, Pakistan, the naphtha, the heavy fuel oils going to Asia. And these flows are all the same and more or less around the same volumes. Like I said, sometimes gasoline is a bit more, then fuel oil is a bit more, but the trend line is steady. So we haven't seen much different in the established products, in the refined products. And of course, we're looking very much forward to what's going to happen with the crude. That definitely will, not definitely, but hopefully that will be a bit of a game changer and will elevate, of course, the volumes. That's the anticipation in the market. But in terms of refined products, it's just, it's business as it was before.
Chris, on that point, I mean, a lot of the narrative around the COVID period in terms of change is maybe that it has accelerated everything that was already in play, whether it be the great energy transition, whether it be remote working, whatever one you want to choose. It has been an accelerator, and everybody needs to move a little bit faster. Your thoughts of it as a change moment, of what the legacy of it is or not for the likes of Fujairah and the market east of Suez?
I think this situation has strengthened the position of Fujairah as a strategic hub, and it's clear that Abu Dhabi, by their connectivity to the greater Fujairah system outside their own dedicated system, but also with the strategic cavern project that they are developing for their strategic petroleum reserve, along with the linking of Fujairah to the rest of the UAE by rail, which is ongoing. I think there's a very, very strong drive to continue to strengthen Fujairah as a logistics hub, which is, frankly, what the port has been saying and the agenda they've been on for the last 20 plus years. So I think it has strengthened that position in and of itself. I think what we all anticipated, at least with transition, and is a little bit of a wake-up call to all of us, is that yes, while we support energy transition, the viability of transition is complicated, and we have to maintain adequate supply chain and adequate inventory to absorb the shocks. I mean, I think here in Europe, we obviously try to curtail coal production. Nuclear production has been curtailed over the last several years. The demand impact that COVID has had stifled the total apparent demand. But now with tight gas inventories and the incremental draw on liquids, incremental draw on coal has been quite surprising. So I think the the evidence is yes, at least to answer the question, I agree that COVID has had an impact, but it hasn't fundamentally changed the trajectory. That's going to take a much longer period of time. In the meantime, Fujairah has strengthened their position in the area and strengthened their infrastructure capacity, which is good to see.
Just on that point, Adi, I mean, again, accelerate, and the earlier point about the connectivity of ADNOC infrastructure, and Chris made it again there. That's been a long time coming, right? I mean, it's Chris, who's been in Fujairah and been one of the leaders for 20 years, could have sort of predicted that many, but it took a while. I'm wondering, Adi, from your point of view, slightly the ability to look from the outside, do they need to move quicker? This idea of accelerate, i.e., coming out of the COVID pandemic, one needs to do things quicker, i.e., do they need to avail of the connectivity to the manifold and utilize it quicker, not as a contingency maybe, but actually start to really game change? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think your question and Chris raised something even bigger and longer term, sort of the whole place of Fujairah in the energy transition. As you probably know from before, my views is that while the energy transition, we always expected it to happen over 10 years' time, it's actually happening now. And that's the accelerating bit that you're talking about. While COVID, I'm not sure COVID actually accelerated it. I would rather argue that COVID was more of a wake-up call, more of an indicator what is likely to happen in near future, so that we actually saw the sort of real life sort of simulation or what's going to happen as demand falls and so on and so forth. Now, the Gulf producers, as the low cost producers, are certainly in a driving seat in this energy transition. As Chris mentioned, it's not going to happen overnight. Oil is going to be around for quite some time, because and this sort of queues here in the UK for petrol have been a wake-up call for everyone who thought transition was going to happen smoothly and quickly. So I think that all the Gulf producers, including UAE, are in a very good position, driving seat to play on their comparative advantages and play a role in this energy transition. Of course, that will lead to some more reliance on production of gas, reliance of use of gas.
But just specifically around trading, Adi, I mean, the idea that obviously the Murban contract was just launched. We now have the connectivity to the Fujairah manifold. There is an opportunity to accelerate here into that space. The DME took 10 years to become relevant. I don't think Murban or they have that kind of time. And that might be the shift that is going on. Your thoughts?
Murban, in theory, does have that time. The question is, do you want to have 10 years? And my answer would be no, certainly not. And I think in that respect, particularly about the Murban contract, I think there's something that needs to be done very, very quickly. As I mentioned early on, I'm not so sure. I mean, all the infrastructure bits are very important, but I think what's more important in this case is we need to have the delivery cost of Murban drop significantly. They're very high at the moment, probably up to 25 cents a barrel. If you go physical with a Murban cargo, what it does, it can still support Murban contract, but what happens is the price of Murban then gets automatically discounted in the marketplace, which is not a good thing for ADNOC, definitely. So, and sort of issues like that, little operational issues, for example, my understanding is that a lot of operational issues regarding the physical delivery are being pushed down to the clearing members that are not really well equipped to do that. So having a clearing group like DME finally did is not necessarily a bad idea. I think it's a good idea, for example. Nomination, and that leads to nomination schedule, for example, for DME, it's 10 days, for Murban, it's 5 days. It makes it harder for people to trade it. So all these little things need a lot of work operationally and otherwise to make it a success.
Let's get to the survey result, and I'd love to get Chris here to just pick up on those thoughts. 7-3-1 agree that the established order hasn't changed. Chris, also just picking up on that point, the idea that this is a moment to accelerate, perhaps not to maintain the same pace of development if you want to get to be a Singapore, etc. And here is the opportunity of some of these building blocks, but also welcome in that China, I would say, one of the big outcomes of this transition is the realization that China is drifting to a normal level of growth of 3%, whether it's today or tomorrow, but ultimately that's a big change moment too. And what does that mean for the likes of Fujairah and all of these trading blocks?
Listen, I think if you just look at the Fujairah inventories, and Morten can add to that, I think the function of Fujairah as a lung to the Gulf and to the Gulf producers has been very clear. You know, we've gone from maximum inventories 16 months ago to probably minimum inventories on record over the past. I don't know. I don't want to say if it's minimum ever, but it's lowish inventories in Fujairah for over the past few weeks or month, and I think that is Fujairah doing its role as a logistics and storage location in the region, which will continue to happen. In terms of accelerating, I mean, we have transition. I think I don't know what accelerating faster means in terms of Fujairah.
Well, let's say Aramco Trading, the only trading desk in Fujairah. Anybody else going to come in there? I mean, the idea of to create that ecosystem, does it need to move from Dubai to Fujairah? This type of infrastructure.
I don't think so. I think you can, you know, we can manage Fujairah from Bahrain or from London. I don't think you need to physically be in Fujairah, and I think what Fujairah has is the energy ecosystem that works together, and it has expanded exponentially, in my view. I mean, you can always do it faster, but if you look at even over the last 5 years, what has changed is still quite phenomenal, and there's quite a lot of incremental land, the other side of the Vopak terminal to further be developed. So the opportunity set is there. I think what the dialogue should be rather than accelerating, it should be what is the next evolution in terms of strategic function for Fujairah in the energy markets, and what should be the next push. I mean, obviously, IFAD and the delivery of physical crude is critical and will continue to evolve, I'm sure. But what is the next critical push for Fujairah? Should it be, and how does it work itself into the sustainable, renewable side of the equation? And maybe, you know, conversations that have been had for a long time on the gas side. Is there a function there for it? So I think in my view, rather than accelerating with what we have, it should be accelerating towards what Fujairah will evolve to over the next 20, 25 years. And that would be an interesting dialogue.
Let's get the survey result there before giving Martin the last word and see what the room thinks about the COVID pandemic. Right, we have the 3-1. The next question we wanted to ask was related to the connectivity issue. The next survey question. As we discussed, ADNOC is expected to connect to the port manifold in Q4. Will this be the game changer for onshore oil trading in Fujairah that many expect? Yes or no? There might be a few other answers one could put in there for people to choose from, but let's just stick with yes or no. Martin, picking up on those developments in that sense of evolution, obviously the port and the Fujairah have recognized the need for more soft architecture. We've done the inventory weekly report. Now this year you've done the monthly bunkering data. Where else do you see that sort of evolution, that step forward that supports the potential trading, the data, the transparency?
Yeah, that's something we continue to review with Voice at Fujairah Oil Industry Zone with our partner APPEC Global Platts. So yeah, we are looking into potentially additional data. if that is of course an added value. We are reviewing that, what kind of data we maybe should add to the monthly or weekly publication. We will also increase our engagement, I think, with the traders, with the market, especially I think at APPEC at some point. And of course, yeah, you mentioned earlier the ambition, of course, for Fujairah to go into sort of price benchmark. That is a long-standing discussion. I think, we're making steps forward. To see if the NOCs and IOCs eventually will use Fujairah as a pricing point. But I think also, we've spoken about APPEC. I think we have to be fair as well to APPEC. They just established, of course, their trading arms. It's very, very new. APPEC Global Trading, APPEC Trading. They're just, getting started in Fujairah, right? Both on the clean side and perhaps in the near future on the crude side. So these are developments part of that, and that's exciting. So yes, we continue to review that, John. I think what Chris mentioned is very, very valid. As we speak, we're doing quite a comprehensive study on Fujairah together with Voice and a third party to see, how does the current market look like, but very more important, where should it be, exactly as Chris said, in the coming 10, 20 years. And then, of course, we're touching on gas, we're touching on renewables. What kind of role can we play? We know a lot of happening in Abu Dhabi. In terms of the production side, but what role can Fujairah play in this new energy landscape? So very valid points, and that's, I think, in the coming months we will develop a roadmap to address these points.
Okay, well, let's wrap up this session with the survey result of what the room's view is on this manifold connection. 2-1, yes, this is a game changer, says the room of 55. That is a wrap on the trading. We're clearly going into the more tangible with storage subject next. But thank you, Martin, for hosting. Chris Bake, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
For Adi, thank you so much as well for joining the conversation. All of this obviously is recorded and will be made available afterwards for everybody to review.
Sure.
Let's move on to the storage session, outlook for Fujairah and the post-pandemic cycle for storage, and invite our panelists to open their camera and microphones. Harry Dattatreya, Global Oil Director for Royal Vopak, Malik Azize, Operating Partner at ProStar Capital, and Captain Ali Al Abdouli, Deputy Manager for Fujairah Oil Tanker Terminal. Welcome to the three of you. Thank you for joining us. And having just listened to the conversation that we have had with the first session focusing on trading, of course, oil storage is both on the product side, a critical part of the Fujairah offering, connectivity with the port. We've got a long legacy of oil products in Fujairah, and now emerging on the crude side with most spectacularly the construction of the ADNOC underground cavern. It's not underground, it's in a mountain as such, 42 million barrel cavern. Perhaps we can kick off this session with a introduction, sort of a macro introduction from Harry as regards the storage industry globally, Harry, over the course of the first 3 quarters of 2021, coming out of the COVID crash last year, spectacular storage opportunity. What does 2021 look like? What would be your summary?
Now, Sean, that's a very good question. Yeah, I think that if you look at 2021, what would be the summary? I think it was a pretty amazing year. I think we've seen year 2020 with rapid building up of stocks. And if you then look into 2021, I think the year is characterized by volatility. I think that is the key thing we've seen. We've seen a lot of questions on COVID. What is it fading away? How will vaccination work? What is the response if you look at the supply of both crude and products, I think that is really the key characteristic of this year. And yeah, still we've seen some periods when there was a rapid increase in, for instance, demand for gasoline in certain areas. We've seen in Europe quite a lot of transportation this summer. So it's really a volatile year. I think that's a critical element.
Harry, we've seen in that a very deep backwardation emerge in the market over the 18-month outlook. What's your sense of how that impacts decision making now?
And the question is
the impact of the deep backwardation, which of course generally is a disincentive to storage development.
Yeah, I think contango and backwardation, that is probably one of the few constants of our industry. So we have seen that over the years. I think what is really driving storage, it's all about what are the regional imbalances, what need is there to blend products, what is actually happening on the physical side. If you talk about trading between parties, I think that is one of the key drivers that we see in the market. Contango and backwardation is another element, and yeah, it's not really new what we saw happening this year. What we did see is what happened last year. That was pretty exceptional. Such a tremendous drop in oil consumption in such a short time, and also the negative pricing at a certain moment was something I haven't seen before.
Malik, 2020 was clearly a spectacular year in storage. Everybody seemed to make money, but on the trading side, on the storage side, it was a very lucrative year. Your thoughts on 2021 from on the ground in Fujairah, given the sort of decline, the draw on inventories now, as Chris mentioned in one of his last comments, inventories at very low levels.
Yeah, I must say 2020 has been not a terrible year for storage, and 2021 looks like it's going to be as promising and as lucrative, I would say, for different reasons, however. In 2020 was more of the fact that nothing was moving and people were looking for tanks to store their oil, which was floating around, and there's so much of it that wasn't being consumed. So the turbulence played a huge role in protecting the oil from overflowing, really.
Yes, literally.
And in 2021, we see a slightly different picture where demand growth is coming back. Consumption of the countries and the population is also coming back gradually. Okay, it's not overnight increase, but we see a gradual increase in demand and consumption from the neighboring countries, where Fujairah plays a huge role in supplying, whether it's gasoline or gas oil, or even fuel oil blending for bunkering. So the business is coming back. For storage, occupancy, as in contractual obligation for customers to take storage, hasn't changed. What has changed, I can tell you, is the turnover and how many times you turn around your tank. So liquidity is more. Traffic in and out is more than last year, which is good news also for the port and for us, because as probably most of you know, our revenue element is mainly storage per month, but also movement. Movement is a good thing. And in 2021, we have seen more movement of oil coming in and out of the port than 2020. So I would say 2021 is looking even more promising than 2020.
Captain Ali, the big sort of shift opportunity in Fujairah is a move to include crude oil, not to replace oil product storage, which of course is well anchored, but is to add the crude oil dimension to the storage opportunity. I wonder if you're an ability to give us any update as to the progress of the ADNOC cavern, which of course is the big monster, if you like, in terms of crude oil storage of 42 million barrels. There was initially thoughts of 2022, 2023. What's the latest you could share with us as regards the progress of the ADNOC caverns?
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks, Sean, for organizing this interesting workshop. Before answering your question, Sean, I would like to start with saying that Fujairah legacy began as a bunkering and logistic hub, which then flourished to become a storage hub for blending and refined products. And we would like to believe that the next Fujairah evolution will be crude, storage, and blending. The availability of Murban and other brands of crude in Fujairah definitely will benefit the whole market and will support our position as being a global leading hub in the energy sector. Being one of the biggest storage hub for crude is going to be a game changer for us in Fujairah, because it will mean more utilization of the current and future storage capacity, more utilization of the port jetties and infrastructure, more movement, liquidity of product, which ultimately will mean more vessel, more bunkering activities, more services and logistics. This will also strengthen our position with the Fujairah benchmark and ambition. Will support our development for future downstream investment, such as refineries and chemical products. And most importantly, will, I think, attract oil players, more oil players to Fujairah. It's a win-win for everybody. Going back to your question regarding the update about ADNOC connectivity. Alhamdulillah, it's going to be on a track. I think very soon you will hear an announcement from ADNOC about that. Once the connection is being made, ADNOC is going to have full flexibility to utilize all of our berth, our connection lines, and they will have exactly like a maximum utilization of the Fujairah infrastructure.
In terms of the caverns themselves, the storage construction, is there any update as to when that may be completed?
Of course, I mean, like any other project, there was, I think, a slight impact by the pandemic. But honestly speaking, I think ADNOC is going to try their best to meet the target. I haven't heard anything officially from them regarding that aspect. But what I know that they are very active, and they are very optimistic that inshallah the target will be met on time.
Harry, whether it's next year or the year after, ultimately the construction of the biggest crude oil storage cavern east of Suez in Fujairah, what sort of an impact will that have? What sort of an opportunity does that present, do you think, to the likes of APPEC and others?
Yeah, I think that it's probably the combination, both the physical delivery of Murban and obviously the cavern, that's a key, that can be a key driver to support crude activities in Fujairah. And I think that Captain Ali is already pretty clear on what the impact could be. However, you really have to ask the question if the market needs more crude storage. If you to really support the trading and the development of Fujairah on the crude side. If you take, for instance, Brent, that is also, that's a non-physical delivered future. It's a very large benchmark. And yeah, still it boosts a lot of the activities. But if you look at it, then for a crude hub, it's very important to have local industrial activities like refineries, etc., that will really boost the activities in a certain market. Now, if you talk about what the IFET future will mean for Fujairah, I think that is something we very closely monitor. And we do say that the current basis, which is there, is very positive. But we anxiously follow the future to see how it will develop.
Are you indicating, sorry, just on your earlier comment, that Fujairah has too much storage on the crude side, or your question is open-ended? Can you answer it?
My question is open-ended. So I would say that if you look at crude storage, having industrial activities, refineries, etc., is a good catalyst. if you look at other big refining centers, for instance, or petroleum trading centers, then in general, there is not that much of non-industrial related crude storage. If you take Rotterdam, the majority of the crude there is linked to industrial activities, or it could be linked, like in Fujairah, to the production of the actual crude. So how it will develop in Fujairah, that really is something to closely monitor. But the combination of having local delivery plus industrial activities is a good catalyst.
So Malik, ultimately, lots of crude oil storage coming, not so much industrial activity. Harry's indicating that that's a disconnect. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, Harry's point is spot on. You cannot just rely on IFAD to create throughput for the crude, because that doesn't work that way. What we need is more industrialization in terms of refineries, downstream, and potentially petrochemicals. But we understand that that's also coming. As you know, there are talks about some major development for refineries, especially that the fact that you have some announcements about potentially a new refinery in Fujairah. We already have 3 refineries, but if you put refineries aside, so one of the big roles that this can play, the ADNOC crude, is the blending that can happen in Fujairah tanks, third-party independent storage tanks, whereby those terminals can use some of the ADNOC crude to create the blend that is specific for certain refineries. Different refineries have different needs. So one role that we can play as terminals is to create this blend. We can put this recipe together and then create that perfect match for certain different refineries around the world, not even regionally. We can stretch all the way to China or further afield. So that's one role you can play. The other role at which you'll see an increase in all these VLCCs coming in and out for the purpose of crude lifting or any other crude activities will create more bunkering demand, which is one of Fujairah's backbone. So that's one more thing we're kind of relying on, more low sulfur fuel oil blending, which we have done quite a bit of. And we can see also the high sulfur fuel oil is coming back as more VLCCs and more ships are installing scrubbers. And that volume will just increase as the volumes of crude activities increase in Fujairah.
Captain Ali, your thoughts on that? The idea that is there not too much storage capacity? We're seeing in Singapore, they're moving completely away from storage now. There's certainly no crude oil storage, and even a cap on facilitating any growth in product storage. And here we are looking at adding capacity. And of course, we just had the announcement recently about the BP GIC commissioned the phase 2 expansion of its crude and product storage terminal in Fujairah.
Well, first, I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate them on this huge achievement. To be honest, this oversized shortage in capacity has been a debate for several years. But I think it's safe to say that the oil market always expects periods of backwardation and contango. And there will always be times of overcapacity, and the opposite is, of course, correct. With that being said, the oil market will be around for at least the next 30 or 40 years, which will see a continuation in the global population growth. And as a result of that, of course, will mean more demand for energy. In that regard, Fujairah is committed to continuous development. We have the potential to cater for the growth demand as FOIS is expanding its available land for future infrastructure. And the port also has the superstructure efficient enough to add 12 more berths and second VLCC when required. We work closely with our partners to ensure sufficient infrastructure is always available. One thing I just want to highlight here, a few facts about this year. I wanted to comment on it earlier. This year has been like exceptional for us in the port of Fujairah, despite of the fluctuation in crude prices, we've seen an upward trend in oil movement at the port, which is expected to make this year the most successful year ever in terms of throughput volumes. Back to you, Sean.
What about, Captain Ali, the point Harry's making on the idea of industrialization, a large-scale refinery, hundreds of thousands of barrels? Malik make note that, of course, there are 3 small refineries making low-sulfur fuel oil ultimately, but the idea of a very large refinery, a very, an industrial development in Fujairah to complement the crude storage.
Well, as Malik rightly said, yes, there are 3 refineries which are producing almost 200 barrel per day. Very small one, 40,000 barrel per day, will see the light also very soon from Ekumar. Borouge phase 3, I mean, they've made this announcement that they are gonna build this 180,000 barrel per day refinery, which will also like justify the future expansion in storage market. On top of that, what Malik said is totally correct. Blending activities and also will utilize more of this crude. And Fujairah as a government is working doing their due diligence to make sure that what is going to be available in the future is going to be like properly utilized by the partners here in Fujairah.
Let's get the survey question in, again, sort of opening up the point of the change from the COVID pandemic. Again, the sort of headline of this workshop, coming out of the COVID pandemic, what sort of a change impact that can have and on storage as well. So Irene, if we could bring up the storage question. The current energy supply shortages in Europe and Asia will trigger a massive investment in building more strategic storage capacity. We've seen the SPR, Strategic Petroleum, being tapped in China. We're seeing it being tapped in the US. There's been a lot of talk of floating storage over the course of the last year. But this period, and particularly, Harry, with the increased talk about the energy transition being a bit disjointed, that storage, both gas and oil, will become increasingly more important from a strategic point of view rather than simply commercial. Your thoughts coming out of the COVID pandemic, some of the legacies that might impact the space and in that Fujairah?
Hey, Sean, you have very good questions. Maybe just to come back to what we discussed about the crude capacity and the plans. It's not really about a disconnect, but my statement is really about it remains to be seen how it develops. So the question is out on the future. I would like to add that to it. If you look at crude of strategic storage, let's first by starting to say this is about strategic oil storage. If you talk about gas, that can be a different story. I think if you look back to last year, with this unparalleled disruption, I think what we saw is that the global storage capacity was really able to address the demand for storing crude. I think that is what we saw. It was relatively short-lived, this tremendous drop and oversupply. But the combination of land-based storage, there is a lot in various countries around the globe, but also the floating storage was really able to address the requirements. So in my view, I do think that current global oil storage capacity is really sufficient. If there would be a tremendous boost in demand, if you talk about the future oil demand, then you might have a question, but a lot of the key agencies indicate that global oil demand will probably peak at, 110, 120 million barrels a day. So that is not a lot more from where we stand right now.
It's not, but ultimately the point is, let's say we saw over this period, the Chinese move from 90 days cover to 100 days cover, which in of itself, they're at about 15 million barrels a day or something like that. So the idea of that expanded need for cover and what impact that can have on the market. Is that something you see coming out, India looking for greater strategic storage or not?
I do not really see that. Years ago, somebody in the Middle East made a statement that the best place to store crude is in the ground.
And hence Malik Oedoc are building it in a mountain. But the idea that that mountain is in Fujairah perhaps and not in Abu Dhabi might be the difference between the ground and the mountain. But your thoughts, Malik, coming out of COVID, is there legacies impacting that from a storage point of view that we need to take note of, or presents an opportunity or a challenge?
What I see from my role now with ProStar, where we're looking at global pictures on expansions and investments into the storage space, that the demand is still there, but it's coupled with also investments in the green energy. So any other development with oil, you have more triggers and more drivers to try and attach to it a green project, let's say. Whether it be it LPG, a bit more hydrogen, looking at various sustainable long-term energies, in order to make it more appealing also to the government hosting those oil storage. That yes, the demand is there, and as Captain said, it will not go away for another 20 or 30 or maybe even up to 40 years. But still, there is this drive for green energy. And it's more of an accountability for people now to start looking at how they can develop that renewable energy.
What about in the context of the storage infrastructure itself, Malik? I mean, from the size of the tanks, are the tanks in Fujairah too big? Are they too small? Is the industry globally looking at a different, more environmentally aligned structure, energy efficient, that type of thing?
Very good question, Sean. As a matter of fact, Fujairah is a very environmentally friendly port because all the terminals are linked to this matrix manifold system, which means it cuts out a lot of the shipping and a lot of the oil tankers coming in and out for individual terminals. We're all connected to one matrix manifold. One ship comes and discharges in one terminal, and then the trader who has a tank in that one terminal can sell to the other terminal without chartering a ship again. Just open a tap, and through the matrix manifold, it goes to the next door neighbor tank or terminal. And that is a huge cut down in terms of carbon emissions, ship movement, which is in a way you'd think is a loss for the port not to have all these ships coming out. But on the other hand, they're more concerned about the environmental factors, and that's why they invested this huge amount of investment to make this matrix manifold, which is quite unique in the world, to be honest.
Captain, before we give you the last word of this session, let's just get the survey result from the room. Again, another 3-1 that the current energy supply shortages in Europe and Asia will trigger a massive investment in building more strategic storage capacity. So perhaps you might want to be reclaiming more land, not less. Captain, your thoughts on again, the same idea coming out of the COVID pandemic, the opportunity and challenge this moment presents, the legacy of it for Fujairah, and particularly the storage side?
I think the pandemic has been like, has given the world a great lesson, to be ready. I mean, it has taught us the importance of having like feasible strategic storage in order to deal with the major market supply disruption and price fluctuation. I am astonished, of how China, how benefited from the possibility to buy cheap, crude in 22. These are very good example on how contingency will benefit the countries. Personally, I think one should expect some country to initiate building or expanding their strategic reserve, and in such a way that it will allow them to commercialize percentage of it and just make it as a contingency in the future. One thing I wanted to add to Malik's comment regarding the environmental things in Fujairah. I also need to mention that Fujairah government has invested in a system called the electronic notice, or emission detection system, which consists of like almost 90 portable and fixed sensors around Fujairah, which detects all emissions. And alhamdulillah, I can like proudly say that all of the terminals or voice like area is really doing very good in that regard. I mean, we rarely see any complaint about harmful emissions, or the parameters which we set to accept the cargoes are always met by the terminal, which is really a very, very good news for us in Fujairah.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think it is just make the final point worth noting that ADNOC were very specific in their announcement when they first informed the world of the 42 million barrel cavern, that it was not strategic storage, that it was for commercial purposes as well, which of course creates a whole array of opportunity that everybody will be alert to as time moves forward. But thank you, Harry, very much for your participation, Malik, and of course Captain Ali for hosting from the Port of Fujairah. Really appreciate your insights and contribution today. And so we'll invite you to turn off your cameras and we'll bring on the final session on shipping. Okay, so we've talked about the trading, we've talked about storage. We will now take on the topic of the outlook for Fujairah in the post-pandemic cycle with regards to shipping. Let me introduce our speakers, starting with Rania Tadros, the managing partner in Dubai of INS law firm, Captain Mayed Almeri, harbor master at the Port of Fujairah, Pradeep Rajan, Senior Managing Editor, APPEC for Freight Markets at S&P Global Platts, and Faidoun Panayotopoulos. I'm sure, and many of these names, and that one in particular, once you go into 5 syllables, you lost. Senior Trader at GMS. So I do apologize, Faidoun, for not getting that correct. Please turn on your camera and your microphone, and we look forward to your insights. Welcome, and let's have Captain Mayed as well. Pradeep, if we could kick off with you, sitting in Singapore, the markets, giving an overview as we've done in the previous 2 sessions on the world year to date. There's been a massive opportunity. Containers, they've never made more money. They're more valuable than gold. Tankers, less so. What's been the shipping headlines, if you like, for 2021 in the first 3 quarters?
Thanks, Sean, for having me on this workshop, and I'm delighted to be here. Well, I think you asked a really, really good question. I think it's been an unprecedented year for shipping markets, and I can say it's also a phenomenal year as well. And if you look at sector by sector, as you said, containers, if you touch a container, it's almost like rubbing off a few smattering of gold on your finger, and then that's where the story really started. But at the same time, the dry bulk ships were not far left. They were not behind, isn't it? Containers are making around, around $10,000 to $12,000, per TEU for shipping from Far East to North Americas. And if you look at the dry bulk markets today, across every sector of dry bulk markets, whether it's the Capesize or the Panamax, all of them are above the $35,000 range. But if you come to the tanker markets, and that's where the grief is. While our containers and the dry bulk veterans are having parties, whereas the tanker markets, they're grieving. The fact is that tanker markets, after the phenomenal contango play that we had in 2020, when oil demand destruction happened due to lockdowns, a lot of the ships which went into storage, with now crude being backwardated, those ships are being delivered, redelivered back to the markets, and they're adding to the supply side in the spot markets. And which is why today a VLCC, just to give you a bit of perspective, today a VLCC to move 1 metric ton of crude from the Persian Gulf into a port in China, you are paying only around between $6 to $7 a metric ton. And then that's really, really low levels. And VLCCs are, some of them are operating below the OPEX levels, the operational expenses levels. So they are in the negative territory. They're not making enough money even to run the day-to-day activities. Whereas there are a few ships that are eco ships, which are not many. Those ships would be just making break-even levels and they would be able to run the show. But given the fact is that it's been a phenomenal year, but we would expect the tanker markets to come back quite strongly. We are starting to see the signs of it. Given that oil demand is back and OPEC has really not opened off its taps, we're starting to see a lot more oil from the Atlantic basin coming into the Far East. So what happens when oil comes from the Atlantic into the Far East is that you add to the ton-mile demand. You're moving 1 ton of oil at the really, really farthest distance. So if you're bringing crude from the Persian Gulf into the Far East, let's say China, that's around 27 days voyage. If you're bringing crude from the Atlantic into the Far East, that's 45 days voyage. So you take a round voyage, it's 45 plus 45, 90 days, a ship is pretty much in an employment, and she's not out of the employment until the 95 days is completed. So, but whereas you do a trip from PG or the Persian Gulf into the Far East, the ship is back almost after 30 days or 40 days, So we are starting to see the ton-mile demand increasing because of the supply side issues in the Persian Gulf, rather not enough OPEC supply out there in the market while demand is increasing. We are starting to see a lot of these Atlantic barrels, and they're adding to the ton-mile demand, and we're seeing slightly better freight rates in the VLCC markets or in the dirty tanker markets. And we could expect the same sort of a story even in the clean tanker markets, given that a lot of inefficient refineries, especially to be carbon compliant, will have to sort of slow down their operations, and you'll have a lot more complex refineries out there. So that means there could be sort of lack of supply of clean products in a particular area, and you would start to see the clean tanker markets making longer hauls to supply those areas. So we would expect, give it, Q4 of this year, we're starting to see the sign, and Q1, Q2 of next year, the tanker markets will come back to party.
Faidoun, if we might bring you in from a regional point of view, that global picture Pradeep has painted regionally, how has the shipping picture looked from the point? Obviously, are we the tanker market weak, which is not a good sign for this region?
Well, I think that Pradeep painted actually the real picture here, and what we are seeing, obviously, there is a two-level market, a two-tier market, let me put it that way. You can see the bulkers and the containers, which had their long overdue recovery after, let's say, depressed rates, on the container sector, actually, for the past 5-6 years. I can still remember in 2016, 2017, we recycled a 9-year-old container, which was quite an amazing thing by that time. But definitely, there's a huge demand surge, especially with COVID providing this actually reboot of the markets. And tanker sector, of course, had very, very lucrative times, mainly the beginning of the COVID era, with all this huge demand and the oil production not being cut to the percentage that it should have been. So definitely all this oil flooding the market. Every trader went out there looking for a VLCC. Actually, ourselves were actually thinking, we had the proposal to refloat one of the VLCCs that we had beached in one of the yards in order to put it back in storage business. That was back in April. But obviously, the cycles cannot be predicted right now. And definitely all these tonnage with the oil prices increasing and going, as you very correctly said at the beginning of the session, in the region of $80 per barrel, all this tonnage is actually, the market is backward-dated. And right now, this tonnage is being thrown back to the market. And we believe that recycling will be definitely one of the solutions. Actually, we believe that, and we expect that 2020 will be the year of tanker recycling, which we have not seen since 2018, when 42 VLCCs were recycled within 1 year only, effectively removing from the market around 13 million deadweight only on VLCCs, without counting the Suezmaxes, the Aframaxes, etc. So this will be a year of heavy tanker recycling. We already see this, especially on the bigger VLCCs, the FSOs, especially from the region here and Malaysia.
What about when demand comes back? We're seeing the forecast demand recovery to 100 million barrels a day in the first quarter next year. Will we go into a tanker shortage from a tanker surplus?
I think some of the writing is on the wall. I mean, if you let things play out for the next 6 months and recycling also run its course on these vessels, and you can see that Even Fujairah port is actually positioning itself in order to take advantage of higher prices. And I believe that the trade will be back, and the demand, as very correctly Pradeep said, will be there in the market to help this recovery of the tanker sector.
Rania, the shipping sector seems to have quite a turbulent COVID from the point of view of shortages, bottlenecks, the disruption, containers being lost all over the world, and yet we haven't even included the challenges coming with carbon, with the acceleration of the energy transition, and of course shipping is right in the crosshairs of that. How is shipping set up to meet these challenges, of which net zero by 2030 is not far away?
Yeah, I think net zero by 2030 is a very ambitious target, and the IMO hasn't suggested that that is a target that they're going to work towards. So I think the IMO is working more towards a 50% reduction of carbon emissions by 2030, and then perhaps something closer to the 100% by 2050. But I think whenever you're predicting things to happen in 30 years' time, you know, we've all learned from COVID that you can hardly predict what's going to happen in the next 2 years, yet alone the next 30. But shipping has a role to play in reducing the carbon emissions, and the introduction of low sulfur fuel oil a couple of years ago was the IMO's really first step into that. Obviously, the increased price of LNG at the moment probably isn't helping on that side of things, with people being slightly more uncertain as to whether clean energy is going to be affordable and what sort of clean energy they want to go to. But I think net zero by 2030 is not an achievable goal for ships. I think a significant reduction, probably in the region of 50% by 2030, is a much more realistic aim for shipping.
Captain Mayed, welcome as our host in this session from the port of Fujairah. How has the year impacted the port? And normal times, you would have, I think, around 18,000 visits a year from in your offshore anchorage area. How has the year been to date?
Yeah, in fact, the number of vessels that called Fujairah port offshore anchorage area last year was 13,147 vessels, and the peak was in 2017, where
did Captain
at least almost 15,000 vessels this year till date.
Captain Mayed,
can you hear me?
You were cutting in and out there. You were saying that in the peak year in 2018.
2016, where the number of vessels, where the numbers reached almost 15,000 vessels at our Fujairah offshore anchorage area. But we can see that this year till date, we have almost the same number of last year, about 50 vessels short so far. But we still expect the total number of vessels to call the Fujairah offshore anchorage area by the end of the year to be almost over 13,000 vessels, similar to last year. And in terms of vessel movements, basically, we've seen an increase on vessel movements inside the port itself. So in the first 3 quarters of 2019, we had over 2,600 vessels calling inside the port, and this year we've seen an increase of 6% compared to last year. So basically, the vessels that are calling for cargo operation are more than the vessels calling for marine services at the anchorage area, and this is for basic reasons, basically due to restriction on crew change. On last year, we had the pandemic hit hard, mainly the crew change in our anchorage area, and we have an average of around 4,000 crew change activities in a month, and we've seen a reduction in that number starting from May this year, because there was a restriction on some nationalities to sign off vessels through port of Fujairah. But again, in last month or beginning of this month, this restriction was lifted. So we expect again the crew change to go back to normal figures, and the number of vessels calling the anchorage area will increase. So I expect the number generally to increase by the end of this year.
Deep, on that point, how big an issue is that globally? The crew change, the mariners, seafarer mariners, predominantly coming from India and the Philippines. Generally, Pradeep, does it continue to be a problem? The COVID, the lack of vaccination, etc., that it is disrupting, or will it disrupt further?
I think that was a very good question that you asked, Sean. Currently, the main issue is not the lack of vaccine. The issue is the lack of travel. The travel restriction. The borders are closed. So if you're talking about Indian seafarers who would have, in the normal times would have, boarded a ship around the west coast of India or around the east coast of India, or they could have been flown to Manila in Philippines and they would have boarded a ship. That kind of ease of crew change is not happening because of, you have the sporadic lockdowns, then, the country opens up, then you have suddenly a lockdown coming in. And that's number one, which is affecting the shipping market per se, because the crew change also delays the ship. And along with that, a lot of the countries where if you're receiving a cargo or if you're loading a cargo, those port states have brought in their own restrictions. For instance, if you take a ship to Australia, from the last, port of loading, the ship should have completed more than 14 days. If the ship reaches within 10 days, then the ship has to wait outside the port, and what we call the OPL, the outside port limit, and spend another 4 days. So all this is adding to the delay. And then a country like China, which is one of the world's largest, receivers of ships, whether it's dry bulk, whether it's container ships, whether it's tanker ships, they have come out with really, really, really tight measures. And today we have instances where in China, if a pilot has boarded a ship, he goes into a 14-day quarantine. So where do you have so many pilots, especially in a country like China, where ships are coming in every day or by the hour? So, and that's causing a lot of congestion and delay, which is also adding to the, the strength in the shipping markets. Because when you have a cargo and you don't have a ship making the right laycan, but you need to pay additional money to get another ship. So congestion is adding to the delays, crew change is adding to the delays, and especially with the border closure, that's also adding to the delays.
Faidoun, what can the industry do to coexist with COVID better? Because ultimately, this is going to be with us for a while. I mean, we might get, better vaccine rates, but what does the industry need to do better in order to coexist with COVID, do you think?
Well, first of all, let me state that I believe that the worst is behind us with regards to the issues that we faced back in 2020 with actually flights shutting down completely, countries and ports not accepting crew change at all. So we are in a kind of a better situation than a year back. But definitely, as Pradeep very correctly said, this is a very dynamic environment in which we operate. And when you buy or schedule a crew change, for example, on a vessel in a specific location a month ahead, you don't know if by the time the crew change is about to happen, you don't know if this will be possible or not. So I think that what we have been incorporating for the past year, not only us, but every owner out there, is the way forward. First of all, vaccination rates. I mean, we have implemented also a vaccination policy on the seafarers that will be joining and the crew change will take place. And definitely work simultaneously on plan B and C. Of course, this requires for you to have a firm schedule as a ship owner to know where your vessel will go by when, have the alternatives there, but also work with the counterparties, either this being a seller or a buyer of a vessel, or this being even the charter of the vessel, in where exactly, what are the interim ports that can possibly have this crew change taking place. So I believe it's a very dynamic environment, still has to be followed up closely, and the owners and the counterparties have to think through this extensively. But I believe overall that we are heading towards the end of the tunnel at some point. I mean, I have heard these explanations that they expect by 2022, end of 2022, COVID, all going well, will be a thing of the past to some extent.
Rania, your thoughts on that, and is Faidoun optimism warranted in the sense that this, from a logistics point of view, like Pradeep is highlighting significant bottleneck disruptions, and we see that in the price of containers. Is this problem being addressed adequately, or what can be done better?
I think the problem appears at two levels. So it appears between the contractual counterparties, where I think it's being addressed reasonably well by people anticipating the risk that arises and agreeing between the owner and the charterer and the cargo owners who's going to bear the risk of delay. But I think where it's not being addressed properly is for the seafarer welfare situation, which is that the seafarer undertakes a lot of uncertainty, not knowing what will happen to them. There aren't really isolation procedures in ports. If one person is found to have COVID, they tend to put the vessel OPL for a prolonged period of time. That obviously increases the chance of other members of crew attesting positive, and then you've got an extended period. So I think what we need is really a global protocol for seafarers, given that they operate globally, rather than having it very much dependent on the local state, a port state control. And you need to have like Faden said, a plan B and a plan C, but that's at state level, not just between the two parties as to how they're going to sort it out commercially. A lot of companies, including ADNOC, have signed the Neptune Declaration, which is a commitment to support seafarers through this. Because other than the cost of all this, there is the mental health impact on the seafarers, who are often having been on board for more than they've ever had to be on board before, because they can't discharge the way they normally discharge. Their journey home is definitely going to be more complicated and more uncertain than what it ever was. And so I think commitment by the industry, but also by governments and states to their well-being is really important at this stage.
Captain, is that a point well noted? I'm obviously Fujairah. We live in a country of 7 emirates. There's a federal government. Each emirate has its own. We had a border between Fujairah, or between Abu Dhabi and Dubai on land. These are added complications.
Not necessarily, because these issues which are related to health, for example, at the government level in Fujairah, for example, it's supervised and controlled by the National Crisis and Emergency Management Authority, which is a federal level organization. So it controls all these matters at the federal level. And we have the Ministry of Health and Protection, and they also look after it. But generally speaking, within UAE, we can say that we are helping a lot with the issue of crew change and making sure that, and even COVID cases and how we treat and isolate people on board vessels. To give you an example here, for example, in Fujairah, we have our certain protocol that if a vessel is infected with positive cases on board, then we allow basically the vessel to call the anchorage area, and we send the crew in the isolation rooms in Fujairah Port Medical Center. And if the case is, let's say, mild or asymptomatic case, then it's treated in the clinic. But if the case is moderate or severe, then the case is transferred to the government or the Ministry of Health medical facilities, where he gets treated until he recovers fully. Then he can go back to his ship, or even he can fly home. So we have certain protocols and procedures in order to help seafarers and vessels with COVID cases. But the main challenge for seafarers, basically the other countries in the region, that they still till date they don't allow crew change, and even if there is a positive case on board the vessel, they don't allow the vessel in, and so on. But we've been very helpful and cooperative with the shipping industry and ships in helping them to overcome this challenge of COVID-19.
It is ultimately, from the point of view of Fujairah or any port, whatever the challenge might be at any given time, the efficiency and adapting to new challenges. And one of them, of course, is the challenge of the move towards carbon zero, net zero on the fuel side. Let's bring up the survey question on that. And will ports like Fujairah and Singapore be able to retain their position as the world's leading bunkering ports without offering zero carbon fuel within coming years? I mean, the time frame on this you could say 5 years, the decade that we're in, the 20s, that if you don't start offering zero carbon fuel within the 2020s, will you remain competitive as a bunkering center? Pradeep, your thoughts on that? Obviously, you sit in Singapore, generally world leader on many issues related to logistics and ports. Where do you see this issue going? 2030, zero carbon. Is the industry changing, adapting fast enough? Are ports adapting?
I think, again, you hit the nail on the head. In fact, the shipping industry is being forced to act fast. You have the IMO, International Maritime Organization, who's going to come up with legislation for starting 2023, when you have two regulations, CII and EEXI. So CII stands for Carbon Intensity Indicator, and EEXI stands for Energy Efficiency Shipping Index. So what does CII tell you? You need to reduce the carbon emission from your ship. So every ship will need to have a CII grading, where you start the grading from A to B and C and D and E, and D and E being the lowest denominated ratings. So any charterer who's out in the market to take a ship will look at ships that have been graded A, B, C. So that's really going to have an impact on the market. At the same time, ship owners are being forced to be compliant, because charterers have created their own initiative called Sea Cargo Charter, where you have the big companies in the industry. You have VTOL, you have Trafigura, you have companies like Anglo American. There are big other big companies like some of the NOCs are there, Reliance is there. So all these charters or signatory to Sea Cargo Charter will not take ships that are not efficient, as well as they will not take ships that are emitting more carbon. But coming to the ports, as we all know that the market would head to methanol and ammonia. LNG will be a transition fuel. For the fact that LNG, if you look at its what we call the global warming potential, is much higher compared to every other liquid or any other marine fuel that you can think about, because the fact is that LNG, the methane slip, in fact, it takes almost 100 years to get away from your atmosphere. So LNG may not be the sort of the fuel of choice. That will be a transition fuel. But when it comes to port, I'm sure a lot of the ports in the world, including Fujairah, can be ready, given the fact that currently methanol is being supplied through over 100 ports around the world. So I think
Captain Mayed, let's bring you in on that question. Is the port thinking about this? Obviously, big bunkering hub, you adapted to the ultra low sulfur fuel oil 2020 protocol pretty well. What about this?
Yeah, we basically welcome any new alternative fuel that wants to come into Fujairah and be part of the fuel mix in Port of Fujairah. We haven't been approached by any organization that wanted to have methanol or ammonia or hydrogen as an alternative fuel in Fujairah so far. But LNG we have received many companies that were interested to have LNG, but as you know that currently the infrastructure is not there. When we speaking about some of the fuel like methanol and ammonia, they are still premature actually to have them in the market yet, because they carry their own risks and safety issues. So maybe I don't see this as happening in the next few years, but maybe at a later stage, because the majority of the world tonnage is still burning either heavy fuel oil or shifting towards LNG.
Faidun, your thoughts on that? Is there time, or does Fujairah, in order to stay relevant, need to move quickly?
Well, it depends actually what time frame you're putting this, because if you're asking me about 2030, which has been discussed here, I mean, I don't expect 2030 to be a feasible, let's say, target goal for the shipping industry, mainly because, let's say, the majority of the vessels that are currently trading will be with us at least by 50-60% by 2030. So if we're talking about 2050 and onwards, then yes, definitely. But I think the question here and the dilemma that the shipping industry is facing is actually not if there's going to be an investment. There's definitely going to be an investment on reducing the carbon footprint of the shipping industry. The question is which investment is actually the correct one. And this is a very tough decision that actually ship owners have to come to terms with, because it's a fast-paced environment. Regulations are always changing. I still remember 2020, the VLSFO versus HFO discussion, and there were several millions pumped up into the scrubber part of it. And definitely, I don't see this being a good return for the owners that made such a decision. And we have been facing all these different alternatives, like, let's say, as Pradeep said, LNG. But this is a chicken and egg story, actually. Will the infrastructure be there, and investment on the infrastructure will be there if the demand is actually not there from the part of the ship owners? And will ship owners actually pump money into new builds or retrofits if the infrastructure is not there to supply these bunkers? So I think this is a $1 million question that the shipping industry is facing. And now there are other alternatives. We discussed methanol, definitely it's in the spotlight with Maersk, etc. But we know also that biofuels are eating into the capacity, probably carbon capacity of the vessel. So there are all these different aspects of it, and it's not a straight answer. But definitely, I believe that a shift to alternate fuels or transition fuels, as Pradeep said, is going to be in the books over the next 10 to 15 years, that's for sure.
Let's get the survey result and give Rania the last word here. 50-50 is the answer here. Do you need to make the shift in order to be a leader in bunkering? And there seems to be a mixed view on that. Rania, your thoughts on how important it is for a bunkering hub like Fujairah to make this shift in order to stay relevant. At the end of the day, the bunkering is the core of what brings 15,000 ships a year to Fujairah, calling at the anchorage area. Your thoughts on how important this will be going forward?
I think that from a bunkering perspective, the port has an advantage because ships take a while to build, and so it can follow the tracking of how many LNG powered ships are being built, and therefore is there really going to be that capacity need to satisfy them, rather than the hype that you get around when we talk about zero carbon. We have a lot of hype around methanol, around Maersk. How many ships are there? Do they trade to this region? These are the sorts of questions I think that a place like Fujairah and a place like Singapore are going to be asking themselves. And rather than having to speculate, they're going to have time to build their infrastructure in order to meet the demand that's going to be set up by these ships that are still being built. So when we look at the order books, yes, there are a number of ships in those categories at the moment under construction, and therefore these ports are going to have to modernize and be able to meet more carbon efficient fuels. But I think the key question, which wasn't put in your survey, is how long? Is this a 10-year project? Is this a 20-year project? I think we're talking over 10 years.
Well, we saw the IMO, Pradeep, being quite robust in their enforcement of 2020. There was a lot of, they're going to push the day, 2020 won't happen. But they held quite firm, and I would expect the same on this occasion, because over the next few years, carbon is going to become even more naughty word than it is even today.
Absolutely. You can see the sign of it happening now. The fact that you have the SCC, or the Sea Cargo Charter Initiative, proves the point that people are, on a unilateral basis, people are trying to be carbon compliant. All the signatories, the big companies, oil majors like Shell or Total, who are signatory to SCC, will be comparing their carbon emission levels among their peers. And they are the ones who are forcing the ship owners to be compliant. So the pressure is not coming from either the government or anyone else, but it's these companies who are the big boys of the chartering world. And they spend multi-million dollars in chartering ships. So they're putting pressure on the ship owners, and the ship owners are being forced to come to the party, or are forced to
What is
comply.
Singapore? What is Singapore doing, Pradeep, regarding ammonia or these other new carbon neutral fuels?
Yes, Singapore has actually made some headway in the sense that they're thinking about, starting methanol bunkering. The reason I mentioned about methanol bunkering is that recently there was methanol bunkering that was done in Rotterdam. You can use the existing infrastructure. You don't need a specialized bunker barge. You can use the existing bunker barges, just that they need to be clean. And so methanol seems to be the easy way out. And Singapore, being a sort of like a petrochemical hub as well, will push for methanol, as well as already it is doing quite a lot on the LNG side. And of course, ammonia is a little bit too early the fact is there's a lot of development that's happening, especially ship engine makers like MAN and Wärtsilä. These companies have already started to work on these ammonia engines. But it's early days, but methanol, Singapore, I'm sure will have a sort of a first mover advantage or a second mover advantage after Rotterdam.
Well, that is where we need to wrap up our session. I'd like to just give Captain Mayed as our host from the Port of Fujairah, the last member of the Port of Fujairah team on this workshop, to just give us some closing thoughts on the overall sessions and what he's heard today.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and thanks for this knowledge sharing workshop. That and it's good that the thoughts and the ideas that we heard from the participants, and I thank them all for their inputs, and I thank you also, Mr. Sean, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Mayed, and thank you to everybody, and we send our best regards to Captain Musa, of course, the Managing Director of the Port of Fujairah, and wish him well. We will be capturing all of the salient points of the workshop, and we will be formatting them into a white paper that we will share with everybody. And we also thank the 150 people who logged in to watch and listen to the 3 sessions. So have a great day. We look forward to seeing everybody in Fujairah for the Energy Markets Forum in March, which we postponed for 6 months due to the obvious challenges with COVID. But we are looking at the March 14, 15 for our annual, the 10th anniversary Energy Markets Forum in Fujairah. And hopefully we will see everybody in person, shake hands, exchange business cards, make some business development relationships, and continue the great work and progress of Fujairah as it moves forward to become one of the most important global energy hubs. All the best, everybody. Take care and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.